Hi, my name is Sarah Marie Johnson. Thank you very much, Connie. I think that you kind of covered like my first two slides, so that's great. So Rachel, you can go ahead. So I am a certified peer support specialist, and I am also a survivor of human trafficking. Um, I have long-term recovery for 9 years. I live here in Myrtle Beach, and I work at Shoreline Behavioral Health as a peer support supervisor, but I do many other things here in Myrtle Beach and for Shoreline. So I'm gonna kind of get right in. I'm actually really excited to be here because this presentation was specifically made for the medical community. The first time that I ever presented this was for MUSC, and I'm really excited because I've presented this many times after, but usually it's to other groups of people. It's not to providers and others, and so I'm really excited that that I'm here actually. So thank you very much for y'all inviting me. Um, so I'm just gonna kind of get into like my experience and a little bit of backstory. So I'm from Charleston, South Carolina. I grew up downtown. And I started using drugs and alcohol when I was 13 years old. It was very manageable through high school. And I ended up going to college at Converse College, and I fell into like a deep depression. And I ended up really ramping up my drug use. And by the time that I was 20, I was in my first treatment program, Wilmington Treatment Center. And I actually ended up entering recovery when I was 20 years old. And I stayed in recovery until I was 22. And because I was so young, and I kind of convinced myself that I didn't actually have a problem. I didn't understand the disease of addiction. And I started drinking a glass of wine every night with my dad. And so drinking a glass of wine eventually caught up with me, and I started using my drug of choice. And in one weekend, I lost everything. So at that time, I was actually, I worked in a pharmacy. I was a pharmacy tech. I was going back to school for graphic design. I had an apartment, I had a car, all the things that we try to strive to get back in recovery. And in pretty much one weekend, I lost it all. And so I was homeless. I was using again. I'd lost my job. And I really dove into trying to do graphics, and because of my graphic design degree. But I was working at a it's like a hotel, I guess y'all could say. Or it's like anyways, it's in Pawleys Island, and they do a lot of golf tours. And I was also dabbling in prostitution at that time. And so I met a man. He was golfing for the weekend. And he really took an interest in me. And this was when my luring started. So this is my experience. This is the sex trafficking, how it happens. And mine is very basic, very cut and dry. I went through all of the stages of sex trafficking. And so he's really lured me in. He really showered me with gifts over the week. He let me stay at his hotel room. He, really, I thought, saw me for who I am and not for the drugs that I did. And since I was lost everything, he really fed into that. Also the luring kind of went into the grooming. So like I said, I was trying to do digital arts, and he really took an interest in me doing graphic design. He owned 3 large clubs in Texas. And by the end of the week, he invited me to move to Texas with him, and to start doing graphic design at these 3 clubs. And at that point in time, like I said, I was homeless. I had nothing. Um, I was like, wow, like this could be a really amazing start to a career, and I could get off drugs while I was over there and start a whole new life. So I went in, flew to Texas after a week of meeting him. And I was really like, you can go to the next slide, by the way, Rachel, because this is gonna go into, so this is like the basic stages of grooming. And like I said, it is a basic stage for me. Like he targeted me, he started gaining my trust and information. When I got there, I was set up with, a really nice hotel room, new clothes, a new computer for graphic design, new shoes, all the things. And he definitely was filling a need for me. It seemed like he was becoming like one of my best friends too. It was really you know, it felt good, let's just say, for a man of a status to really take an interest in me. He also though started to isolate me. So isolation came really quickly. Like I wasn't allowed to leave my room. The only place that I was allowed to go was to the club in Dallas. I was allowed to go back and forth, but like someone came and picked me up, someone dropped me off, they walked me upstairs. I wasn't even allowed to go downstairs to get a towel. I wasn't allowed to go get a coffee. I could call and ask for someone to bring me a towel or to bring me a coffee, but I personally could not do that. He took away my passport, he took away my identification, like all these things I thought were normal because he's like putting them in safe places for me. And then really the abuse began. So it was, a lot of the beginnings were him kind of manipulating me into, but I saved you. You had nothing before me. You were nothing before me. You have to do this because where else are you gonna go? Nobody. That was like a big one. The only person is me. Like that mental abuse really started, and then the physical abuse started. You can go to the next one. So by the way, all of these pictures that are in this slide are from me living in Texas during that time. So isolation and sex trafficking. So I always cover this slide really because it started off not sex trafficking for me. It actually started off with forced labor trafficking. I was working 20 hours a day sometimes. Sometimes I would fall asleep while I was working and woke up 2 hours later to go to the club, to work all night, to get up in the morning, only have a couple hours of sleep, to work again. Like really, the forced labor was really big for me in the beginning, and I thought that's just how a good job was. Also, like everyone's like, oh, were you getting paychecks? I was not getting paychecks, but literally I could have anything that I wanted. I could see a purse that I wanted, I got it. And so like I was never worried about the money. That's like a big thing. Everyone's like, oh, well, like you could have just got money and left. I never actually had money in my hand for the first couple of months that I was in there. And so as trafficked sex workers experience sexual abuse as part of being exploited for labor, sexual, but also drug dealing and other forms of illegal work. They are no longer in control of where they live and how they spend their time away from work. Their IDs and travel documents have been seized. They have likely been moved to other locations away from the familiar, so they don't even know where they are, and at any rate lack the freedom of movement. And that's exactly how it was. I lacked all freedom of movement. Uh, and so we're going to go into like the red flags of human trafficking. And actually before I touch on the red flags, I'm just going to kind of go through a little bit of a timeline. So I was in this hotel room. I was working at the club for months, and I kind of gained trust of, we're going to call him G. And I gained his trust, and I could start kind of mingling with the girls who also worked at the club. And I started actually making web pages for girls who worked at the club. And I started getting really heavily into like admin for these web pages, and the web pages were all for prostitution. Later on, I found out that G was actually he was from South Africa. He was taking girls from South Africa, trafficking them into Mexico and up into Texas. And these girls were doing all prostitution for him. These were actually chains of strip clubs, and this is why mainly girls work there. And so one time he asked me to go out with a group of girls to start traveling and to kind of help regulate them because he trusted me. And I was making the pages for them. And this happened a couple times. And then one day he called me and told me to make myself a page. And then all of a sudden I was kind of forced into the sex trafficking. And, at the time I'm like, well, he does everything for me. Of course, like I'll make extra money, like, all these excuses. Of course I didn't want to do it, but I didn't really see a way out at that time. I really thought that this was like the place for me, unfortunately. So a big thing that I'm going to talk about while I was sex trafficked, and this was over almost a 2-year period. I actually went to the hospital 3 times, and I went to the hospital once for thrush in my mouth really bad. I had thrush going down my throat and my mouth severely. Another time was for kind of like a work related injury-ish, whatever. It really wasn't a it was a physical abuse injury. And then the third time, about a year into me being in Texas, I was driving from one city back to Dallas, and I had lost all the money that all the girls had been making. And at this time I had been using drugs again, but by the way, we weren't allowed to use drugs unless if they were like marijuana or like once in a while. He had a really big no drug policy. But when you're traveling away from him, we could use drugs. And so I had started using drugs really heavily again, and I was driving, and I really didn't want to go back to suffer the consequences of not having the money with me. And I decided that life was no longer worth living in about a 3-second time span, and I drove off a 30-foot cliff. And when I woke up in the hospital, and I had broken my back in 3 different places. And so we're going to go through the red flags and the emotional red flags, and then kind of go into also the times that I was in the emergency department and what to look for. So the physical red flags: untreated or under treated workplace injuries. That was like my second time that I was in there. I had actually been sorry, sometimes it's okay, sometimes it's not. I was literally beat up with a cattle prodder, and I was tased with a cattle prodder, and I had a lot of burns and a lot of injuries, and my arm was fractured and all this other things. But it was definitely undertreated, and I waited to go for a very long time. Bruising and burns, exposure to toxic chemicals, multiple pregnancies, terminations. I did not have multiple pregnancies or terminations, but a lot of the girls that I worked with, a lot of the women that I worked with, experienced this. And it was like, you're going to the same clinic, every couple months, like, why are you here again, kind of thing, if someone would have just even asked a question. Physical impacts of long-term trauma, frequent treatment for sexually transmitted infections. Again, like, you're back at this clinic and you have another, STI, like, what can we do to help? Any kind of type of questions would have maybe helped me or somebody else. Physical and sexual abuse. Every single time that I went into the emergency department, there is very obvious signs that I was being physically abused. Communicable, communicable and okay, I can't ever say that word, but we know this. Substance use, dental issues, no one ever addressed my substance use with me. I'm not saying any of these things that are like, hey, they didn't do this. Like, I have no resentments towards these people. I work in 2 separate hospitals. I work in the emergency department. I know how hard it is. I know how busy they are. I know that a lot of times if the peers are not there, it's hard to address the substance abuse. It's hard to address these things. Like we see someone one after another, like there's no resentments or anything that I'm saying this, that, I didn't get help. These are just the facts that I didn't get help. Tattoos, burns, or scarring to indicate branding. I have a brand on me. And I know for a fact that multiple medical providers saw that brand. And it's pretty large. And so, if anyone would have maybe just taken any kind of, wondering about it. Emotional red flags, confusing or contradicting stories. I always had a confusing or contradicting story. There was no set in stone story where I could tell you something over and over again the exact same way. I always had confusing and contradicting stories. Still to this day, I think I lied so much to so many people that it's still hard to process what actually happened to me. The inability to focus or concentrate. I definitely never could focus. I was always scared. And I tried to cover up being scared constantly, but I was always in fear. Unaware of location, age, time. There was many a times I had no clue what part of Texas I was in. Protects the person who hurt them, minimizes abuse, always protected the person who was with me. Reserved or guilt and shame about the experience. The guilt and shame for me really didn't come until later because I could not process really what was happening. I was just really scared and fearful. Reserved, avoiding interaction or providing limited information. I'm only going to give you the information, absolutely, like what you need and nothing else. Of course, the psychological trauma, depression, anxiety. I did put sexual acting out in children and young adolescents in here. I do always say though, I do not talk about sex trafficking with children. The reason I do not is because I do not know how that is. This is all from my experience. I was not a child. I was an adult, and unfortunately, in the United States, 94% of people who are sex trafficked are children and 6% are adults, and I am of the 6%. So I do throw that in there, but I never go into detail about children because I feel like they probably have a lot of different signs than I did. Knowledge and behavior outside of typical range for age, fear of appointments taking longer than expected. I always was trying to rush to get out of there. Reporting the need to update spouse, friend, or significant other. And we're going to go into that last one. Rachel, you can go into the next slide. So the reason why the second or the last one, I said we're going to go into this one. So this was actually a picture of me when I was in the hospital, when I broke my back in 3 different places. And a big thing is I was never alone when I went to the hospital except for this time. And so another girl was always with me, and I always had my phone on speaker, so with G. And someone else always talked for me. Like I would talk a little bit, but I mean, I'm talking about like if I started to stutter, if I someone else would always take over and talk for me. spotting the signs in the emergency department, reluctance of victims to disclose their true situations. So if anyone would have asked me, I would have not told them my true situation. Like I said, I was extremely scared, but if they would have just dug a little bit, they probably would have realized that what I was saying was not my true situation. In many cases of trafficking, the perpetrators will accompany victims to the health facility, posing as a friend or family member. They will prevent them from speaking freely. We just went into that. They will refuse to leave the patient's side, or they will demand them to be on speakerphone if left alone. The vague chief complaints or only psychiatric symptoms. It was always a vague chief complaint. I remember when I went in for thrush, I was like, it's my mouth. And they're like, what's wrong with your mouth? I'm like, I don't know. Well, what happened to your mouth? I don't know. Well, can you tell us what? I don't know. And then someone else would start talking for me. Um, Identifying trafficking victims by acknowledging victims' fears and providing a secure and non-judgmental environment in which to tell their stories. Isolate suspected trafficking victims from anyone accompanying them to health facilities. I always say if someone would have had separate me from the person that I was with and took my phone or asked me to hang up my phone and started to just maybe be compassionate towards me, or talking to me about maybe even something else other than what they thought was going on, like drug use, or why did, I'm pretty sure I got the thrush actually from methamphetamines. And so if they would have started talking to me just about maybe methamphetamines, just maybe I would have said something. If someone would have maybe just made me feel comfortable. And then also like a big one too is, if anyone, and especially the time that with my back, I had just tried to kill myself, but nobody not once addressed mental or anything that has to do with psychiatric care or anything at the hospital with me. And I was in the hospital for 2 weeks. But they didn't ask me to do a psych report. They didn't have someone come talk to me about it. Nothing. No, me trying to commit suicide was never once talked about in the hospital. And I think that like if someone would have maybe just came and talked to me about it, that would have probably been just a little bit different. So these are the resources to help in South Carolina. I'm just gonna kind of end the story though to be a little bit more positive. So obviously I am not being human trafficked anymore. Obviously, I got out. There was a series of events. I ended up getting arrested, and I actually purposely got arrested. And when the police officer put me in the back of his car, I literally just told him everything. I don't know exactly what changed. I don't know exactly if I was tired of it. I couldn't live that way anymore. But I told him everything. He put me in isolation for 10 days. I thought that because I told him everything that I was in a lot of trouble, and in reality, he actually ended up finding my family in South Carolina. My dad flew out and he picked me up from the police station, and I came back to South Carolina. I wish I could also tell y'all that I stopped using drugs at that point. I had no coping skills at that time, and I did not stop using drugs. This was in June of 2014, and I actually stopped using drugs, and my recovery date is January 10th, 2015. And that was also kind of through a series of events. We went, and I can send these slides out to anyone or I can send them to Rachel and she can send them to anyone who would like them for the resources. And then my journey to healing. So I found out that I was pregnant December of 2014, and I just knew that I wanted to give the child that I had inside of me a chance to live. and I didn't know if I wanted to stay clean, but I ended up going back to jail and then getting out and going to a place called the Greater Love Homes that's no longer here in Myrtle Beach. I attended 12-step meetings, and then I got really involved in counseling. I went to intensive outpatient care. Obviously, I had a safe place to stay. And I got medical care for the first time in a long time. That was like a huge thing for me. I really needed medical care. I really needed prenatal care. And because I was already 14 weeks by the time that I found out I was pregnant. And I had an amazing OBGYN who listened to my story and never judged me, and really encouraged my recovery. And really encouraged me also to do what I felt like I needed to do for my baby. Like, she never pushed me in one direction. She just gave me a lot of resources, and still to this day, I'm really grateful for her. So I also I slowly re-entered back into society by relearning basic life skills. Where I was living at Greater Love Home, I had to learn basic life skills again, and that was like a really big thing for me in my healing place. So thank you so much. I'm sorry that was like a really speedy version. I talked really fast. I hope I didn't talk too fast, but I wanted to keep time for Mandy too. So thank you so much for having me, and thank you.
Sara, thank you so much for sharing your story.